Hello, today I'm going to be looking at structs in Rust. I haven't practiced this at all, so hopefully it's going to go okay. It looks pretty straightforward. A struct is a kind of structure which, like tuples, can contain things of different types, but the fields are named. And from what I can gather, this seems to be a pretty big deal in Rust. Let's define a struct. So we have the keyword struct and a name for the struct, which begins with a capital first letter apparently. And here I'll have a name of type string. Let's have an ID of type I32 and maybe a field is alive of type bool. I think it's bool in Rust. I wonder if we can have a trailing comma there. I'm also not sure if we need a semicolon there. Now I'm going to attempt to print this, which looks a little bit tricky, to be honest. Let's lose the terminal and then we'll have a print ln exclamation mark semicolon, and you'd think it might print with this colon question mark format specifier, but I don't think it will. Actually, we haven't even got a struct at the moment. Better create one. So how do we actually use this? Let's say let person1 equal person, and here we can specify values for the fields. So I'm going to try putting that on another line, and we'll have name equals Joe Blogs, comma, ID equals 82, and is alive equals true. And I'll try a trailing comma there as well, because I'm curious to see if those work. So if I go to the terminal now, first thing I'm going to do is run cargo format to see what I've got wrong with the formatting. Well, I'm not sure if it actually changed anything, did it? Okay, let's put this all on one line. Let's make this smaller so I can see it better. And then I'd like to print person1, but I might have to make some adjustments to do that. So just try that again, and then let's do cargo run and see if anything happens. So what are the actual errors here? Yeah, I think what I need here is actually colons like this. So let's try this. I'm probably thinking of Python here. So here we need a colon and here we need a colon. All right, let's try that. So when I format it, it tells me I need to use braces as delimiters. So I suppose I need these. See if it likes that. Okay, well, at least cargo format ran. Okay, so now I've got something like this. Let's try it and see if it actually runs. So it doesn't run, and it tells me that I need this stuff above my struct if I want to be able to print it. Apparently this activates some kind of debug mode, which the documentation does mention, and then you can print your struct. So let's copy that and paste it here. At least it tells you what you have to do. Can't say I'm wild about this syntax, but let's go ahead with that. Okay, now it says for my Joe Blogs field, it expected a string and it found a str. So here, let's say string colon colon from, and try that and see if that works. So now I guess I'm dynamically allocating memory on the heap. So now when I run it, it actually does work. So finally I've got it right. So we've got a struct, we've defined what fields of what types it takes, and I've created a thing from that struct. Well, actually, is this an object? I'm not sure. And then we printed it. Are we allowed to have default values for these fields? Let's try putting an equals true in there and just see if it works or not. Yeah, it just says, please remove this unsupported default value. Well, it doesn't say please, but it just tells me to remove it. So let's get rid of that. I guess we can't have default values in by the looks of it. And actually the documentation, which I've just checked, says that this is an instance of this struct. Now another thing that we can do is create a new struct based on the values of this struct that I've just created. So let's say let person2 equal person, curly brackets then, put the semicolon in. We didn't need a semicolon there though. I'll try it without and see what happens. And then we can define the fields that we want to define. So let's say name is string : from. Let's put in here, what's the equivalent of Joe Blogs for a woman? I really don't know. Let's try, I'll just put Mary Sue. Okay, and then we can have this notation, ... person1, which should fill in default values from person1. And that has to be the last line in a struct apparently. Let's also try to print this. So I'll duplicate this line and we'll try to print person2, and let's see if this works. Yeah, it wants a semicolon after the print lines, or maybe it was after the struct that it's complaining about. Line 19, it wants a semicolon, so that's right there. So I would think really I should probably put one there as well. Let's put that back and try again. Okay, now it works. Now we're actually printing these structs, and you can see that Mary Sue has values filled in from Joe Blogs because of this syntax right here. Now I thought the struct documentation said that this one would no longer be valid after we had done this because this is going to move stuff, but here it seems fine. On the other hand, these are both copyable fields. They're fields that would allocate data on the stack, and I wonder what would happen if we simply overrid these instead of this. Let's try commenting this out, and here I'm going to write id : 93, and let's see if this works. I'm curious about whether it will still print this first struct, or whether the fact that this struct now has to get its name from this struct is going to make this invalid. So we'll try that, and yes, it tells me that when I try to print person1, there's a value that's been borrowed here after a partial move. So I guess a partial move because I've tried to move part of the struct. So to get it to run, I'm going to put that back. So we'll just copy over is alive, I think. So now that works. Now the docs say that there is a shorthand way of filling in these fields, and it gives an example with a function that has a parameter which has the same name as a field in the struct. But I'm thinking maybe a local variable would also do the trick. So I think let's try that and see if that works. Make it a bit smaller maybe. Hopefully you can still see this. So let's try to create person3. So let person3 equal person, and I'm going to fill in some fields here. Actually, it will be interesting to know what happens if I don't fill in fields. Let's try filling in ID, which can be 12, and we'll have is alive. Let's make that false. This is a dead person. And I'll just try that, and actually we'll print it as well while we're at it. So I'll duplicate that, and here we'll have person3. Oh, someone told me in the YouTube comments that I can actually do this if I've remembered correctly. Thanks very much for that tip. So let's try this because this is a little bit less typing. Okay, so I'm expecting this to fail because I've not filled in name with person3, but let's try it. So if I run this, it just says missing name. So the error message is a good one at least. Now here's how I want to try to fill in name, and I'm not sure if this will work because the example in the documentation does involve a function with a parameter that in this case would be called name. But let's just have a local variable. So I'm going to say let name of type string equal, and we'll say string : from, and here we'll have John Smith, semicolon. So I should just be able to write name here. Let's see if that works. And indeed it does. So we've got a struct here with the name John Smith. So if we have a parameter as the same name as a struct field, instead of writing name equals name in this case, I suppose, or name : name, we can just put the name of the variable right there. And this could be useful, for example, if you've got a function that has some parameters which you want to use to fill in a struct. Now there are some more kinds of structs. One kind of struct is an empty struct that has no fields. So we can say struct machine, and it has no body at all. I'm not sure what happens if we print that though. Let's try it. Print line, ! semicolon, double quotes in there, curly brackets. Oh yeah, we've got to actually create a machine though. Let machine equal machine. Does that work? And I'm going to put a machine in here and attempt to print it. And I guess we also need, probably also need this, right? Well, let's just see what the errors say. So I'm going to run this. Yeah, it does want this on here, even though it's a empty struct. And so if we try to run that, that works, and it just literally prints machine. So that's what you'd expect, really. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, this is called struct update syntax, apparently. Now we can also have a struct that has fields that aren't named at all. These are called tuple structs, and the difference between these and actual tuples is that these have a name, so you can use the name of them as a type, whereas a tuple wouldn't have a type name, it's just a generic tuple. So let's say here, struct point, let's have a 3D point. So in that case, I'm going to want some floats, I suppose. Let's say I64, 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 3D point. And then we can say, let point1 equal point. Notice there are round brackets there, exactly as if it was a tuple. And then we'll have 0.5, 1.2, 3.4. And let's try to print it. So I'm just going to copy this and we'll try to print 0.1. I'm guessing that I still need this stuff, but I just want to see. Yeah, I still need it. So let's copy that and put this right here and run it again. Oh yeah, I typed I64. What I meant was F64, of course. I was thinking these were floating point. Let's just change this to F. That ought to work. And yes, it actually does work, and it prints out quite nicely. And of course, we should also be able to pass references to structs to functions. So let's say I have a function called display, and we can make that take a parameter of the person struct type. So here I'll have person of the type reference to a person. Let's attempt this. So I can access the fields in the struct with a dot notation. Let's have a print ln exclamation mark, semicolon, and then here I'm going to say name colon, and we'll have a name there. And then let's have, what else did I give person? ID and is alive. So ID is that, and alive is this. So I should be able to access these via the struct that I've passed in, or that I will pass in. So let's say here, person.name, person.id, person.is alive. I wonder what the formatter would do with this long line. I'll find out in a minute. But let's just try this. So let's say here, display, and I'll try to display person1. Does that work? First I'm going to run cargo format, see if that does anything. So yeah, it's actually formatted it really nicely. So that's good. And I'm going to try to run it. It says not found in this scope. Oh yeah, because I define the struct here within main, so I can't then use it as a function parameter down here. I honestly don't know what to do about that. I wonder if I could just define this outside of main. We'll try it. So I'll run the formatter and we'll try to compile it. Wow, it actually works. So here we've got name and the other details printed out. So evidently I can define a type up there, which is good to know. What about if we define a kind of tuple struct up there as well? So let's take this point out here and put it at the top, because then I should be able to define a function that also displays the values of this. And in this case, because it doesn't have named fields, I should use a dot notation with numbers 0, 1 and 2. Let's try it. And I'm also not sure if I can have overloaded functions with different types. Let's try that as well. So this should display a tuple struct. So we want a reference to point here, to the point struct. And here Let's kind of print this in a sort of coordinate style. So we'll have X, Y, and Z, conceptually at least. And what I want to fill in there is point.0, because it doesn't have named fields, point.1, it's a tuple struct, and point.2. Now, will this actually work, or are those going to clash? Let's take a look. Run the formatter and run. Yeah, it actually just says display redefined here. Display must be defined only once in the value namespace of this module. So clearly that doesn't work. Let's call it display point, and I've got to use it up here somewhere. Here I'll call display point and point1, except that's got to be a reference. Let's try it. Doesn't work just because I've got a missing semicolon right there. Okay, yeah, and now it works. So we've successfully printed out this point right here. Okay, so that's like a couple of pages of documentation on structs. Overall, I think this isn't too bad at all. So I'm going to create a blog post with this as usual. The link will be in the description if you're watching on YouTube. That's at blog.caveofprogramming.com. And you'll find a link to the GitHub repository there. I've actually just been linking through images of the code through to GitHub, but now I've noticed that Substack actually does have a thing for inserting code now, and Substack's what I'm using, so I'm going to see if that works when I write this up. So these structs obviously are similar to what we have in C++ or C, where they're basically like a class. Except in C++, I've kind of slightly forgotten C. I'm going to revise that shortly. But in C++, the difference between a struct and a class is that in a struct, the fields are public by default. So this is pretty similar. What I don't know is if we can give this methods somehow, if we can attach functions to it. I'm half suspecting that we can, because you can definitely have entities that have attached methods or functions in Rust, or I'm pretty sure you can anyway. Otherwise, how does, for example, string work? So anyway, we're going to be looking into that in the fullness of time. I hope you enjoyed this video. I could make these more or less polished. A couple of people have told me they prefer it less polished. They want to see what mistakes I make. But if you have a different opinion, do let me know. And I want to emphasize that this is just me learning Rust and trying to explain to you what I've learned. It's not intended as a course. I do want to make a course on it, but before I do that, I'm going to have to go through all the documentation, I think, and then practice writing some programs. See you again next time.